Hello Empire, Garrett here with the next installment on our leatherworking series. Today I'm going to do on this video, it's going to be the first part. We're going to do how to set a stitch line and some tips and tricks to that. And then in part 2 we're going to cover how to do a saddler stitch. So right off the bat we're going to start here with a nice piece of scrap leather. Now there's a couple different ways you can do setting a stitch line. First, I'm going to show you how to do it with a wing divider set at 1/4 inch. That's pretty standard for a stitch line. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but as you see there, it just cuts a little line right there. This is usually I use a wing divider for chrome tans, oil tan leather, other thin leathers for setting my line, because it doesn't really go as deep. Now what I generally like to do is use my stitch groover here, because this is going to cut a actual deep. We go around this curve here. Show you. And what this does is the stitch groover actually cuts a nice deep groove into the leather, because it's removing the leather. This allows you for when we tap down the stitching, that it's going to give you a much better abrasion resistance and there, so it sits down in the leather so it doesn't stand up and you don't get as much wear and tear on the leather. Now that we've got our stitch line, I'm going to do it this way because we're going to go into this curve. I'm going to show you how to get the curve. I'm going to be using my 4-prong punch and my 2-prong punch. Now what I like to do is get some wax, and you're going to take you there, and I like to put a little bit of wax on my pricking irons before I start stitching. This might be a little far away. So what I'm going to do here, let me position this where you can see it. I'm going to put the tab right there, and I'm going to use the other 3 prongs, and I'm going to set it there. Now when you do this, you want to have it as vertically straight. You don't want to be like left, right, or just even if it's just a little tilted. That's going to cause your needles to go out in weird angles on the other side. So we want to be nice and vertical and straight. And I'm not going to go all the way through it. We're just going to punch it for the purposes of this demo. So now I have these 3 lines. I got that nice spacing. Now I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to put that prong in the end of that one. So once again, we're only actually making 3 new holes at a time. And you just keep walking that back and forth, well, not back and forth, but you're just going to keep walking that the whole length you need to go, however long the project material is. So now we're going to go up here, and I'm going to start in that corner. Let me get around here so you guys can see this. And then, as you see there, I'm going to put it just like we just discussed. Now we're going into a bend. As you can see, this is not going to really work very well. If I were to try to do this, I would end up with odd spots. This is where the 2-prong comes into play. So now I'm only going to go around this corner. It takes a little bit longer because at this point I'm essentially only punching 1 new hole at a time. But as you can see, it is the best way that I know to get around a corner. And you just keep following this all the way around the curve. If you have a sharp bends or any of that, and you're just going to keep doing this. And if you only have a 2, this is why I discussed in budget tools that you go at least with a 2-prong, so that you can do exactly this. And the other thing is, let me show you here. I'm going to go ahead. When you're punching through, I hope you guys see that. You don't need to go very deep. Just enough to go through is plenty. You don't have to go crazy deep like that. You don't need to bury it through the leather. As you see, it makes it harder to come out. All you got to do is just enough to go through. That's plenty deep enough right there. The deeper you go through, the harder it is going to be pulled out. Now that we went through the whole turn and we're back in the straightaway, we'll go back to our 4 one. Now you can also use the 5, but I generally don't like to use the 5 and 6 prong because it gets so wide that the leather is really hard to get in and out. And so I tend to use the 4 and the 2 the most. This happens to be a 6 millimeter, but you can use whatever size you need. And that is how we use a stitching iron. Now, if I were to use, say, a hole punch, as my experiment you'll see in part 2, I would still line the holes up. For example, I would line it up and I would just tap it, or I would just press it in and use it as a marker. I'm not going all the way through, just enough to mark where I want my holes, and I'll punch the holes with a hole punch, but I'm not going to do that in this video. And that is the basics of setting a stitch line. Then once you have your stitch line set up, and you're going to be able to, we'll start on the stitching video next on how to do a saddle stitch. And that is all I have for this, actually. So, sorry, this has been like the 5th time today I've tried to run this video. So we use the 4 and the 2. It can be any size you want. There's wax. This happens to be a thing of beeswax. You can use paraffin wax. It doesn't really matter. It just makes the prongs go in and through the leather easier. It's easier to get in and out. Okay, so with that, part 1 is done. In part 2, we're going to show you how to do a saddle stitch so that now you can do your stitch lines. And with that, that is the end of part 1. And I'll see you in part 2. In the meantime, stay crafty.